Chief Guest, Honorable Mr. Justice Sanjay Kishan Kaul Sahab, Honorable Mr. Justice S. Ravindra Bhat, Guest of Honor, Honorable Mr. Justice Sudhanshu Dhulia, Guest of Honor, Professor Dr. C. Kumar, Vice Chancellor, O.P. Jindal University, Guest of Honor, Dr. Usha Muju Munshi, Chief Librarian, India International Center, Mr. Praveen Tiwari from the Bloomsbury Publishing, distinguished guests, individuals amongst the learned audience, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening and welcome to yet another IIC book discussion. This time on Syed Mahmood, Colonial India's Dissenting Judge by Mohammad Nasir and Samreen Ahmed. A book that celebrates a forgotten hero in history. A book that fills a long-felt gap in the existing body of literature. And a book that this evening brings us all together. At the behest of the authors from the Aligarh Muslim University, the publishers at Bloomsbury, and the premier cultural and academic institution, our host, the India International Center, I welcome you all, but to accord a warm and befitting welcome to this august gathering, it is opportune that we invite Dr. Usha Muju Munshi, Chief Librarian of the Library. It happens to be one of the 3 core divisions of the IIC, Dr. Usha Muju Munshi.
A very good evening to all of you. On behalf of the India International Center and on my own behalf, I extend a warm welcome to the distinguished speakers, Justice Sanjay Kishan Kaul, Judge Supreme Court of India, Justice K. Ravindra Bhat, Judge Supreme Court of India, Justice Sudhanshu Dhulia, Judge Supreme Court of India, Professor C. Kumar, Vice Chancellor, O.P. Jindal, Global University, and to all of you who have joined us this evening for the event. At the outset, I would like to express my deep sense of appreciation and gratitude and congratulate the authors, Dr. Mohammad Nasir and Dr. Faiza Abbasi, for bringing out this excellent volume. For posterity, it is important that considerable progress needs to be made in researching and document the unsung heroes whose contributions have significantly touched the lives of all of us, rather the millions in the world. And Justice Syed Mahmood is one such iconic figure of judicial resistance to colonialism at the apex of British power across the world. Precisely today's discussion book eloquently narrates the triumphs and tragedies of Justice Mahmood's life and his contribution to shaping the consciousness of modern India, unearthing from the annals of history an influential figure while presenting how the past continues to speak in the present. With these few words, it will be only prudent on my behalf to request Justice S.K. Kaul to release the book and with a request to other distinguished panelists to join him. Thank you very much. I once again welcome all of you to this program and wish it a huge, huge success. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Usha, for this welcome. And congratulations to the authors and a word of felicitation from the bottom of my heart to all the dignitaries present here on the dais and of course off the dais, the IIC and the Bloomsbury who have made it all possible. And the word of felicitation is in an Urdu couplet. Tera khaware darakhshan rahe ta abad faroza. Ye IIC ke liye bhi hai, aap sab ke liye bhi hai. Tera khaware darakhshan rahe ta abad faroza. Teri subh nur afshan kabhi sham tak na pahunche. Teri subh nur afshan kabhi sham tak na pahunche. Ladies and gentlemen, before we witnessed this release today, which we have all witnessed just now. The coming of this book has been acknowledged in several reviews, like those carried out in Hindustan Times, Business Standard, and the Economic and Political Weekly. Some riveting book discussions, like that by The Wire and Impar, have taken place online, and others in-person mode at the Universal Bookstore and Integral University, Lucknow, and the Faqir Chands and Sons and Bahari Sons in Khan Market, New Delhi. The one man, binding agent behind our gathering and the elegant proceedings of this evening is Justice Syed Mahmood. The man, the maverick, the one wedded to his mission in the most unapologetic manner, someone who breathed his last more than a century ago, and after having lived a short 53 years, still he is a subject of interest for educationists, literators, and last but not the least, the jurists present here in the 21st century. There was a great Urdu poet, Shah Niaz Barelvi. उनके दो अशार हैं, आपकी नज़र करूँगी. इश्क में तेरे कोहे गम सर पे लिया जो हो सो हो, ऐशो निशात ज़िंदगी छोड़ दिया जो हो सो हो, अक्ल के मदरसे से उठ इश्क के मैकदे में आ, जामे फनाओ बेखुदी अब तो पिया जो हो सो हो. The approach adopted by Syed Mahmood very much reflects this Sufi spirit of the above couplets. What inspired the authors, Mr. Mohammad Nasir and Ms. Samreen, to pick up the pen and write on him will better be explained well by one of the co-authors, the first author, Mr. Mohammad Nasir. And to give a broad framework about the book, I will request him for a short speech. And as we all know, he's an assistant professor in the Faculty of Law, AMU, and he's been a visiting faculty at the Indian Institute of Management, Uttarakhand. And his opinion pieces on legal and socio-political issues have been carried out by the Hindustan Times, Indian Express, the Print, Scroll, and the Wire. So to give a broad framework about the book, Dr. Mohammad Nasir.
Respected Chair, Honorable Justice Sanjay Kishan Kaul, Honorable Justice Ravindra Bhat, Honorable Justice Sudhanshu Dhulia, Professor Kumar, Dr. Usha Munshi, Dr. Faiza, Samreen, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I feel it is no less a challenge for an author to write a book than to speak on the occasion of its formal release. Because whatever you wanted to say already finds a mention in the book. But the obvious question that an author should answer to the readers is as to why this book has been written. And to answer this question, I would like to state that if you look at the arc of India's legal and judicial history, Justice Syed Mahmood comes across as a man of many firsts. He was the first Indian judge of the Allahabad High Court. He was the first Indian Muslim to be appointed to any High Court in India. And remarkably, he was the youngest ever to be appointed to a High Court in India. So at the age of 32 years, he got his first temporary appointment. And at the age of 37 years, he was elevated as a permanent judge. And this feat remains unparalleled in the annals of India's legal history. Justice Syed Mahmood is also the first judge to espouse the cause of judicial independence in the way that we understand it today, that is, in a constitutional democracy. Of course, during the time of Justice Mahmood, there was neither a constitution nor a democracy. So the role of law in advancing justice as to what exists today in a constitutional democracy was something that was entirely absent during colonial times. And so the link between the two eras, the colonial era and the present era, is to be found in the integrity of the fearless Indian judges who espoused the cause of judicial independence and gave us a framework of an independent judiciary. Justice Mahmood was the first amongst this generation. Also, to quote Justice J.S. Verma, the former Chief Justice of India, that Justice Mahmood was the first judge to sow the seeds of judicial activism in India. And that judiciary in the colonial era was considered to be the weakest branch of the state because it neither possessed the power of the purse nor the power of the sword. But in spite of this constraint, the role of the judiciary has in no way been inferior to the executive as well as the legislative branches of the state in the development of India's legal system. And so this book also makes an attempt to rekindle the role of the colonial judiciary in the development of India's legal system by looking at it from the lens of Justice Mahmood's contribution. And so with such exceptional credentials to his credit, it rather came as a surprise that legal, academic, as well as popular scholarship on Justice Mahmood was relatively muted. And so this is something that prompted us to fill this gap and present this book with a disclaimer that the book does not claim to narrate the life and the works of Syed Mahmood beyond its bare skeleton. Rather, it offers to present a framework for looking at his enigmatic personality, his life, and his judgments, so that it could stimulate the appetite of other scholars who are much more experienced as well as accomplished than the author of this book. We also believe that the aspects relating to premature termination of his tenure in the bench, his addiction to alcoholism, as well as his last few years of his life merit further exploration and research by a professional historian rather than academic lawyers like us. And I take this opportunity to also make a confession that while the authors of this book have indeed written it, but the true inspiration for actually writing it lies with Honorable Justice Sudhanshu Dhulia, who over the years has inspired us and motivated us to explore more and more about him. Thank you very much, sir, for all your motivation and also for guiding us at the various stages of its completion. The book belongs as much to the authors as much it belongs to you. In the end, I wish to place on record that it is a matter of highest privilege and honor that Honorable Justice Sanjay Kishan Kaul, who has inspired an entire generation of lawyers and judges, has agreed to release the book as the chief guest. We are beholden to you, sir, and also to Honorable Justice Ravindra Bhat, reading whose judgment we have transformed ourselves from students of law to lawyers, to Professor C. Rajkumar, to Justice Sudhanshu Dhulia. So in the end, I would like to thank all of you for taking the pains and attending this gathering. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammad Nasir. Very well put. The twin job of thanking everyone and also the broad framework of the book. And we congratulate you and we wish you many more, of course, in your future career. Ladies and gentlemen, Syed Mahmood was a highly educated man of his times. He had obtained degrees from the Cambridge University and the Lincoln's Inn, and he had prepared the scheme of the Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College with his father, the legendary Sir Syed Ahmed Khan. Established in 1875 as the Madrasatul Uloom and then in 1877 as the MAO College, this college was upgraded to the present-day Aligarh Muslim University, 1920, by an act of the Parliament, and is the world-renowned seat of higher learning in the subcontinent. So it is only very apt that we have with us today Professor Dr. C. Rajkumar, a Rhodes Scholar and the founding Vice Chancellor of the O.P. Jindal Global University in India. He was appointed as the VC at the age of 34 in 2009 when the university was established. Professor Kumar has academic qualifications from the University of Oxford, Harvard University, University of Hong Kong, University of Delhi, and Loyola College. And Professor Kumar also conceived the idea of establishing India's first global university. I request his observations on the book.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to extend my heartiest congratulations to Professor Mohammad Nasir and Professor Samreen Ahmed for producing what is truly a remarkable book with so much of deep insights into the life of an extraordinary man whose contributions, unfortunately, most of us did not know. I think it is only fair to say that both these authors have done human service to the life of an extraordinary jurist. But then Justice Syed Mohammad was not just a jurist, he was also a remarkable public intellectual. He was a relatively young man when he died, and he had so much of achievements to his credit very early on. He was an inspiration for a generation of individuals because of his contributions. And I think it's only fair to say that his contributions both within as a lawyer, but also as a judge and also as a public intellectual is something that is worthy of study. And I'm so delighted that both Professor Nasir and Professor Ahmed chose to write a book with so much of intellectual humility. There are many aspects of the book which are worth celebrating and also recognizing, but I think I want to pick up a couple of themes. One is the very theme of dissent. And I think it is, today we are living in indeed interesting times when there is a lot of reluctance both in public domain as well as in institutions about the idea of dissent. But here we saw an individual who was working in far more difficult times within the colonial regime when one's own role and responsibility as a judge is even more questionable. At that time, Justice Mahmood was a fearless individual. He was ready and willing to speak truth to power and to maintain intellectual honesty and integrity all through that journey. Not only did he do so, but he was prepared to take a stand on issues that he was also appealing to his own fraternity who were not necessarily sharing his views. I think it's quite remarkable that even when we look at institutions today, including our own various judicial systems, there is so much that can be drawn from the life and experience of Justice Mohammad as to how he engaged with his colleagues on the one hand, including his own Chief Justice. I also want to mention the fact that besides being an erudite judge, he was having a very strong academic bent of mind. He was prepared to go deep into legal issues and also recognize the fact that jurisprudential foundations in interpretation of law becomes important because he was not only adjudicating on cases that will of course have immediate impact, but that can also have a long-term impact on the development of law itself. That requires a very strong academic bent of mind, which he did have. Quickly moving on, I know that I have 7 minutes. Quickly moving on, I want to say that another extraordinary aspect of Justice Mahmood's personality was his deep commitment to institution building. As an academic, as an educator, I am deeply inspired by the fact that he laid the foundations of what we now call the Aligarh Muslim University, and I want to recognize the presence of Professor Tariq Mansoor, the Vice Chancellor of Aligarh Muslim University, and I appreciate his presence to celebrate the work of his own colleague in the university. I think it's what is quite extraordinary, and I do believe that this was so important for him that he contributed to envisioning a university that will contribute to the promotion of excellence, but also investing in young people. I think it is only fair to say that he got high quality education. He was inspired by his experience at Cambridge University and also the Lincoln's Inn. And so arguably his own thinking clearly must have been that how do we bring world-class education into India, into the Indian subcontinent, and he invested in that vision in what is today conceived to be the Aligarh Muslim University. I think it is also quite remarkable that he was able to build collective consciousness among the fraternity of both lawyers and judges and other individuals in galvanizing social consciousness towards the idea of what is now known as the Aligarh Muslim University, and that's equally an important role that he played. Lastly, I want to recognize the fact that, there are so many lives that are worthy of celebration, but I want to particularly thank and appreciate the contribution of Professor Nasir and Professor Ahmed for choosing Professor Justice Syed Mohammad's life and to bring it to all our collective imagination. I think it is only fair to say that most of these lives, as it was mentioned earlier, unsung heroes, we either tend not to know about them or we forget it. But I think this book has in many ways recognized and also created a collective sense of memory of an extraordinary and inspiring life. I did write a longer review about it, but I want to quote that because that was a more conscious effort to exactly say what I meant in the book. So I will read that passage for those of you who have not got the book. This book is an extraordinary tour de force on the inspiring life and phenomenal contribution of an outstanding jurist, independent thinker, engaging scholar, transformative institution builder, and a truly remarkable leader, Justice Syed Mahmood. Justice Mahmood's journey of engaging with law, justice, institutions, and most of all with truth and power made him one of the tallest figures of his time. But what makes him even more special is that he did all of this with honesty, integrity, and rectitude, while maintaining humility and grace. The authors, Mohammad Nasir and Samreen Ahmed, should be thanked, appreciated, and celebrated for their painstaking research and account of the trials, tribulations, and joyous journeys of Justice Mahmood. They have reflected through this compelling work their passionate commitment to the story of Justice Mahmood while maintaining the intellectual rigor and scholarly adherence to the discovery of facts along with his evidence-based opinions. This book is a fantastic read, and the authors have done a human service to posterity by writing this fascinating book and recording forever the story of an outstanding judge who was ahead of his time. Justice Mahmood's contribution may have been forgotten by history, but we could not have been forgiven but for this work, which has done justice, albeit delayed, but thankfully not denied. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. C. Rajkumar. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Mohammad Nasir has just credited the inspiration for this book coming from Honorable Mr. Justice Sudhanshu Dhulia. We have him here with us as guest of honor, and he has also been very kind in doing the foreword of the book that has been released today. I'll take a minute in introducing you, sir. Honorable Mr. Justice Sudhanshu Dhulia was born on August 10th, 1960. He did his schooling from Dehradun, Allahabad and Lucknow, graduated in the year 1981, completed his master's in modern history in the year 1983, and LLB in the year 1986 from Allahabad University. Justice Dhulia initially practiced on the civil and constitutional side before the High Court of Judicature at Allahabad. After the creation of the state of Uttarakhand, he shifted his practice to the newly created High Court of Nainital. He was designated as senior advocate in June 2004 and elevated as permanent judge of Uttarakhand High Court on November 1st, 2008. On 10 January 2021, his lordship took oath as the Chief Justice of Guwahati High Court, and since 9th May 2022, his lordship has been serving as judge of the Supreme Court. In 2018, Justice Sudhanshu Dhulia, and this is something that makes him very relevant to Justice Syed Mahmood, Justice Sudhanshu Dhulia had in deciding a rape appeal filed before the Uttarakhand High Court in Kalwa versus State of Uttarakhand, where the accused had no meaningful defense at the trial stage, had very tellingly referred to a full bench judgment of Allahabad High Court in Queen Empress versus Popi. The case had become famous for Justice Syed Mahmood's dissenting opinion regarding the interpretation of the word hearing in Section 423 of the Code of Criminal Procedure, 1882. We're really proud of this association of yours with Justice Syed Mahmood, and we request you for your erudite comments.
Justice Sanjay Kishan Kaul, Justice Ravindra Bhat, Professor Kumar, Professor Nasir and Samreen, the co-authors of the book, Dr. Abbasi, distinguished guests. I can see Mr. Pritish Nandi, Justice Ambani, Mr. Joshi. Many of you are more qualified than me to speak on Mahmood, but if there will be a list of admirers of Mahmood, then definitely I will find myself in the front line. First of all, the authors need to be congratulated because Mahmood needed a biographer for a long time. And at last, this has come. I think whenever the history of Allahabad would be written, a comprehensive history of Allahabad High Court, then there would definitely be a chapter in it which will be titled as Before Mahmood and After Mahmood. And I say this because before Mahmood, we do not find, Allahabad High Court was only 25 years old before Mahmood. So we do not find many scholarly judgments. They were good judgments, but it was the first time with Mahmood that there was a judge who went to the original source in order to understand the legal problem which was there before him. For example, if he had to give a judgment on law of inheritance, so he simply was not satisfied with reading the commentaries on Mitakshara law, but he learned Sanskrit and went to the original text in order to understand that. This happened for the first time. And by doing this, Mahmood had set a standard which was followed also later by some judges at least of Allahabad High Court, and he had set up that legacy. I can refer to at least one judge, another celebrated judge of Allahabad High Court, Justice Shah Muhammad Suleiman, who also became a judge at a very young age of 34. He became a Chief Justice at the age of 43, who was another very scholarly judge and took his inspiration from Justice Mahmood. But then scholarship was not the only thing which you can ascribe to Justice Mahmood. I think what Mahmood will be known in history will be his concern for the man, for human being. Human being was at the center of his judicial philosophy. And as Dr. Abbasi has just referred to a judgment, Queen Emperor versus Pope of 1891, and I'll just give a short reference of what this judgment was about. See, what happened was in the old Criminal Procedure Code, an appeal was filed before the High Court, and the word was that appellant has to be heard, something of that nature, hearing or heard. So and remember, those were the times when, let us say, for punishment for murder was death or life imprisonment, but generally it was death. If a judge had to give you a life imprisonment, that he had to assign reasons as to why he is not giving death but life. Today it's the opposite. Death penalty is only for the rarest of rare cases, but that time death was generally the punishment given. And hearing meant that even if that person who has been convicted by the trial court and is in appeal before the High Court, and he is not represented by a lawyer, he's poor, he's not represented by a lawyer, nor since he's in jail, he cannot even be present before the court in person. But the court used to think, that was the general practice, the hearing means that the judge has got a file before him and he has heard. If he has read the file, the appellant has been heard. Mahmood found this to be very odd, and he referred this matter to a full bench. The Chief Justice was Justice John Edge, another very good judge of Allahabad High Court. He constituted a full bench of 4 judges, and the majority held, no, there is nothing wrong in it. If a person is there And even if he's not represented by a lawyer, nor is he there in person, but the judges have seen the file, that amounts to a good hearing. Mahmood gave his famous and hard-hitting dissent. And he said that this is the British law in India, the sooner it's abrogated, the better. Now, imagine the times when all this was being said. He was the only Indian in the bench, in the entire High Court. There was nothing like 304 here. I mean, today we have a section 304 of Criminal Procedure Code where it's absolutely necessary for if the accused is not being represented, it is duty of the court to provide him a legal assistance. Of course, now we have national legal authorities and state legal service authorities. But Mahmood said it in 1891. That was one aspect of his personality which appeals to me. The second aspect of his personality was when he had famously said, what happened was that Justice Muthuswamy Iyer of Madras High Court had come to visit Mahmood all the way from Madras to Allahabad. And they had a meeting, and after that, when he went away, people asked Justice Mahmood about Justice Muthuswamy Iyer. How does he think about Justice Muthuswamy Iyer? He said, Justice Muthuswamy Iyer is a great judge. He is much greater than me. So he was asked, why do you say that? And he said that, look, I am a judge of law. Justice Muthuswamy Iyer is a judge of fact. And a judge of fact is always greater than a judge of law. When I first read it as a young lawyer, I really didn't understand the meaning of it, because I always thought, fact, everybody can read fact and know fact, but it is a law which is more important, because you have to understand law, you have to think law. How can a judge of fact be better than a judge of law? But believe me, today, as a judge, we understand that a judge of fact is far greater than a judge of law. There's another aspect of Justice Mahmood which has to be highlighted, and that was that apart from being a scholarly judge, apart from judge who had a deep concern for human beings, he was also a very cultured, very well-read judge. His favorite poets were Gray and Tennyson, but he could recite Urdu poet. If there's an evening, he will recite only Mir the entire evening. Mir, Ghalib. In fact, many of he has quoted Amir Minai in one of this judgment of his Dr. Abbasi had referred to, Queen Emperor versus Poppy. He has quoted a couplet of Amir Minai in that judgment. And his humanism is also reflected by an incident. See, after he had to resign, and we know the circumstances under which he had to resign, he went to Lucknow and started practicing in the Chief Commissioner's Court at Awadh. And he became the top lawyer there. But very soon that practice also went away because of his habits. But at that time, his junior was Satish Chand Banerjee. And there was a day when Satish Chand Banerjee had a very high fever. And Mahmood told him to stay in his house that day. And I don't know what medicines were there at that time, but he took care of him. He didn't sleep the whole night. He used to come and check his temperature, see the whole night. So that was another aspect of Mahmood, which one is not very familiar with. I think Nasir has already said something about it, that much more needs to be written about Mahmood. There's a thought which is always there in my mind, and which is about the circumstances under which Mahmood had to resign. There are some aspects have been touched upon, but apart from that, there are many other aspects which need to be explored. The side of Mahmood has to be heard, because he wrote long letters to the commissioner as to what had happened, and the long exchange of letters. So a book can be written about it, where the prosecution story should be narrated by Justice John Edge, that this is what Justice Mahmood was. And the defense has to be given by Justice Mahmood of what he was not and what he was. And the final judgment be given by some lawyer who was practicing, let's say, Satish Chand Banerjee or Tej Bahadur Sapru. And in 3 parts, you can hear about that story. of what actually happened. But the authors need to be congratulated once again for the wonderful work they have done. Thank you so much.
शुक्रिया जस्टिस सुधांशु धूलिया साहब। मिर्ज़ा गालिब का एक शेर है, ये मसाइल तसव्वुफ़ और तेरा बयान गालिब, तुझे हम वली समझते जो न बादखार होता। तो आपकी शान में थोड़ी सी गुस्ताखी इसका पैरोडी पेश करूँगी। ये मसाइल महमूद और तेरा बयान धूलिया, तुझे हम महमूद ही समझते जो न वकील और जज होता। बहुत शुक्रिया, बहुत शुक्रिया। This was a very riveting address on Justice Mahmood, of course. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now request Honorable Mr. Justice S. Ravindra Bhat Sahab for his address. But before that, a short introduction of him. He was appointed as an additional judge of the Delhi High Court in 2004 and was confirmed as a permanent judge in 2006. He became the Chief Justice of the Rajasthan High Court in 2019 and was elevated to the Supreme Court in 2019. He will demit office in 2023. Justice Bhat has delivered key judgments in several areas, from right to information to capital punishment, validity of constitutional amendments, intellectual property, arbitration, IBC, tax, and insurance. Justice Bhat chairs the Juvenile Justice Committee for the Supreme Court, which periodically monitored actions by state agencies for the speedy rehabilitation of orphaned children during the COVID-19 pandemic. He was also part of the B.N. Sri Krishna Committee on arbitration reforms in India, set up by the Law Ministry, Government of India in 2017. And he has published papers and been invited to attend several international conferences, such as those organized by the World Trade Organization. We request you, sir, for your observations on the book.
Good evening. Justice Sanjay Kaul, Judge Supreme Court, Justice Sudhanshu Dhulia, my colleague in the Supreme Court, Dr. Mohammad Nasir, Ms. Samreen Ahmed, the reason we are all assembled here today, Professor C. Kumar, Vice Chancellor OP Jindal Global University, Dr. Faiza Abbasi, Director UGC-HRDC AMU, Dr. Usha Mujhu Munshi, Chief Librarian IISc, all members of the audience this evening, a very good evening. I'd like to start by reading out a quote. I think I'm taking off from where Justice Dhulia left. And this is a quote from that famous judgment, Empress versus Poppy, where Justice Mahmood says, "It is no use tying a person by the leg, making it impossible for him to appear, and then saying to him that we are here to hear you if you appear, when all the while we know that we have made his appearance impossible." She brought out the stark absurdity of the situation and went on to write that powerful dissent. Just again to join from where Justice Dhulia left off, that beautiful thought of a scene where I think John Edge, the Chief Justice, on one side, Justice Mahmood on the other, and his junior, Banerjee. It reminds me of a recent book, Doza Khana, a conversation between Manto and Ghalib in the mind of the author. Well, that was Justice Syed Mahmood in Empress versus Poppy. I became aware of this decision when Justice Verma quoted it in the hearing in Jamaat-e-Islami Hind in 1994, when the government tried to withhold documents without claiming privilege in support of its argument to ban certain organizations. It remains one of the earliest and finest expositions on natural justice, highlighting its importance powerfully, but without any fanfare. A polyglot, Justice Mahmood was proficient in English, Arabic, Persian, Urdu, Latin, Greek, and Sanskrit. Most of us are aware of his genius, what a brilliant jurist he was when he was appointed to the Allahabad High Court at the young age of 32. The authors of this book draw a very interesting parallel between Mahmood and other brilliant jurists from across the world who also influenced him, and one of them is the great Joseph Story, who himself was appointed after being a Harvard scholar, a brilliant Harvard scholar. He was appointed at the age of 32 to the US Supreme Court, and who, along with Bentham and Blackstone and Koch, was greatly influential on Mahmood's thinking. Justice Mahmood possessed remarkable foresight and was much ahead of his times. A reflection of this is evident in Matadin versus Kazim Hussain, in which he dissented from the majority opinion that gave a very narrow interpretation to the word property. The majority decision was to the effect that property is something tangible, that is some physical object. This judgment was later on overruled. For those not learned in law, we say overruled to discard that reasoning. The prescience of this idea especially resonates today when intangibles such as intellectual property are far more valuable, or even data, for instance, how you structure data. They are far more valuable than tangible property. There are a number of such judgments which display the fullest range of his creative thinking, which the reader can find in this delightful treasure trove. In one such instance, I found the authors have taken pains to find out and tell us that 7 of his judgments have been cited in no less than 4 other countries, that is Kenya, Malaysia, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, apart from our own Supreme Court, which has affirmed many of his judgments. And like a great Chief Justice of almost more than about a century later, Subbarao, we have Mahmood was a dissenter who was far ahead of his times, and his decisions were incorporated in majority judgments much later. An excerpt of one of these that stays with me, especially in my role as a judge, and this is what he said, that the courts are not to act upon the principle that every procedure is to be taken as prohibited unless it is expressly provided for by the code, but on the converse principle that every procedure is to be understood as permissible till it is shown to be prohibited by the law. So, until something is prohibited, everything is permitted. In all branches, brilliant minds converse with each other, not necessarily by direct communication, but by assimilating and using each other's ideas, and at the same time acknowledging their influences. We find that in Justice Mahmood as well. Justice Dhulia mentioned this instance of Sir Muthuswami Pillai, who was probably a much older man than Justice Mahmood, visiting him all the way, going to Aligarh all the way on a visit to Delhi. An interesting part of that story is that he went in unannounced at the stroke of dawn, around 6:30 or 7 in the morning. Justice Mahmood was in the habit of getting up late, around 8:30 or 9 o'clock. So Sir Pillai had to wait for 2.5 hours, and then he left, thinking that he won't get to meet Mahmood. But he left his card. Fortunately for Mahmood, he just got up, he saw the card, and he ran after Muthuswami Pillai and invited him back, profusely apologizing. Now, some of these snippets we get to see, I don't know whether it's there, but I happened to see this in another book called Legends of the Law by Sudhesh Pai. So for some of us admirers, Syed Mahmood, who the authors styled this book as Colonial India's dissenting judge, is a beacon. And this is a great collection which I would invite all of you to read. as in the case of Mahmood, Mahmood probably belongs to a line of intellectuals in the law who had something to do with academics. I think it's not a coincidence, because you'll find the great Ashutosh Mukherjee, who was Vice Chancellor of Calcutta for 5 terms, and during his term you had brilliant minds like Radhakrishnan, I think Ramanujam, and C.V. Raman. He invited them to become scholars as researchers and then teach. Likewise, you had Sir Radha Binod Paul of that great Tokyo trials fame, who headed the Calcutta University twice. He too was a judge of the Calcutta High Court. And I think Jayakar, he established the Pune University. He was a member of the Privy Council. So it's not uncommon that public intellectuals, as the author called, as Nasir called Justice Mahmood, naturally gravitate to education. And in his case, his contributions to education are as brilliant and as telling and as enduring as in the case of law. His brilliance was enunciated by Justice Hidayatullah at the centenary celebrations of Allahabad High Court in 1966, when he said that there are others who first inform themselves about the legal principles, taking pains in this behalf, so that they may save themselves from judging MS. This was in the context of describing how judges do their work and the types of judges that they are. These carve for themselves a niche in human memory. Syed Mahmood was one of this class. Abiding fame came to Syed Mahmood by excellence and not by the popularity of his decisions, by the high quality of his work, and not from political entanglements in which the judge figures indirectly in the rough and tumble of political factions. Recent scholarship has somehow been instrumental in resuscitating the great Mahmood's life and his deeds. I think in 1973, the Aligarh Law Journal published his important works, and legal scholars reflected on his high caliber as a lawyer. A Canadian scholar, Alan M. Gauthier, in 2004 wrote his doctoral thesis on Mahmood. I would end by quoting the great Kanhaiya Lal Mishra, arguably one of the greatest lawyers, according to one of the most eminent one of the most eminent advocates today, living advocates today. He terms Kanhaiya Lal Mishra as the greatest advocate ever. And this is what Kanhaiya Lal Mishra had to say again in the same centenary celebrations. About Allahabad High Court. The greatness of this court, the glories of this court are in a large measure due to Mahmood. If I were to make a selection today, if there was any kind of comparison of the judiciary of the High Court, the judges of this court with the judges of other great courts in the world, and if I had to select a delegate who would represent this High Court, nay, the courts of our country, in an international assemblage of judges past and present, I would unhesitatingly choose Mahmood. I commend and congratulate the authors of Syed Mahmood, Colonial India's dissenting judge, Dr. Mohammad Nasir and Samreen Ahmed. It could not have come in a more timelier manner to showcase to this generation of lawyers and academics that there were brilliant minds like Mahmood's in the late 19th century who have richly contributed to the evolution of Indian jurisprudence and even Indian society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Very deeply insightful comments from you, and we stand enlightened by the information shared from you. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, this book discussion program is being very kindly presided over by Honorable Mr. Justice Sanjay Kishan Kaul Sahab. He was born on December 26, 1958. He studied in Modern School, New Delhi from 1964 to 1976, completing his school education in Science and Economics. He graduated with an honors in economics from St. Stephen's College. the very prestigious college of the Delhi University, 1979. He obtained his LLB degree from the Campus Law Center, Delhi University, 1982, and enrolled as an advocate with Bar Council of Delhi on July 15, 1982. He practiced mainly in the commercial, civil, writ, original, and company jurisdictions of the Delhi High Court of Delhi and the Supreme Court of India. Justice Kaul remained advocate on record of the Supreme Court of India from 1987 to 1999 and was designated as a senior advocate in December 1999. He was elevated as additional judge of the High Court of Delhi on May 3rd, 2001 and was appointed as a permanent judge on May 2nd, 2003. Further, he was elevated as the acting Chief Justice of Delhi High Court and as the Chief Justice of the Punjab and Haryana High Court. Justice Kaul assumed charge as the Chief Justice of the Madras High Court in 2014 and was appointed as a judge of the Supreme Court of India on 17 February 2017. Such are his credentials and accomplishments that they are better exemplified in this couplet of Allama Iqbal. सबक फिर पढ़ सदाकत का, शुजाअत का, अदालत का, लिया जाएगा तुझसे काम दुनिया की इमामत का. I request Justice Sanjay Kishan Kaul for the presidential remarks.
Justice Ravindra Bhat, my colleague and my classmate. And interestingly, we are 4 people from the same batch of law who have had the privilege now of serving the Supreme Court at the same time. Justice Sudhanshu Dhulia, Professor Kumar, the authors Mohammad Nasir and Samreen Ahmed, Dr. Faiza Abbasi, Vice Chancellors of the Aligarh Muslim University, Dr. Munshi, and all my friends and colleagues and eminent people here. Justice Syed Mahmood was a remarkable thinker and a visionary judge. He was the first native Indian judge in the Allahabad High Court, as was mentioned, at a time when India was part of the British Empire. He also had a role to play in the foundation of the Aligarh Muslim University, along with his father Syed Ahmed Khan. These achievements alone would ordinarily establish his position in the pantheon of a great Indian educator and legal personalities. However, as the book details, I believe that Justice Mahmood was also one of the foremost exemplars of judicial courage and integrity, and his life and work continues to be relevant in today's day and age. Before I begin with the address, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to the authors of the book, Mohammad Nasir and Samreen Ahmed. This book has very carefully and deliberately reconstructed a colorful and an intriguing personality, covering Justice Mahmood's contribution to the development of AMU and his 6 years as a judge of the Allahabad High Court. The authors deserve plaudits for unearthing the life and work of a great man who perhaps did not get the attention he deserved. I believe that as a member of the Indian legal fraternity, it is our duty to be aware of our own roots and to know about our own legal icons from the subcontinent. The discovery of our past and of the people such as Justice Mahmood serve to inspire us in our works and renews our commitment to the ideals of the rule of law. My brother Justice Ravindra Nariman, in his book Discordant Notes, The Voice of Dissent in the Court of Last Resort, had described Justice Mahmood as the first in the line of many fearless Indian judges. He detailed Justice Mahmood's constant strife with the Chief Justice of the Allahabad High Court, John Edge, and how Justice Mahmood was tired of Justice Edge's interference in his work. As a last resort, Justice Mahmood preferred to resign only 6 years into his job, thereby underscoring his innate sense of dignity and judicial independence. One cannot speak about Justice Mahmood without mentioning his landmark dissent in Queen Empress versus Porpy. Under the Criminal Procedure Code applicable in 1891, a convict in appeal was required to be given hearing. However, in practice, the Allahabad High Court at that time, as Justice Bhat said, considered that the convict had been given a fair hearing even if the convict was not present before the court or represented by a lawyer, so long as the judge of the High Court had scrutinized the records of the case. Justice Mahmood remarkably referred this question to the full court, which consisted of 4 judges and including the Chief Justice John H. The majority opinion upheld this practice. However, Justice Mahmood, in his powerful dissent, noted the gravity of the consequences that would follow upon the convict if he was not heard. Justice Mahmood declared that right of being heard in appeal could not be diluted in any manner. One must remember that a dissent is a basis for tomorrow's lawmaking. So sometimes it is felt, well, if everybody goes the same line, the same passageway, that's what should happen. Forgetting that the legal minds are rendering opinions. There's nothing to be touchy about it. The opinion is what a particular judge feels should be the law. And therefore, it is the jurisprudential development which takes place through the basis of these dissents which are extremely important. Because what was perceived to be a dissenting opinion tomorrow can be a view to be adopted by the court. Because nothing in law is constant, and that's the beauty of the subject. Needless to say, Justice Mahmood's dissent is the position of law today. His manner of reading the principle of natural justice as a natural corollary of interpretation of law was such a powerful and far-sighted method that one cannot imagine any other method of statutory interpretation in the legal system as it has developed to this day. Now we rightfully take the right to effective representation as granted, while we find ways to improve the system of access to justice in the country. And we have to remember the time period and the context when this opinion was given. It may have taken many years post the independence to have adopted that. So his thought process, as was said, was before time. It arose at a time when the contra was supposed to be the law of the land, and to lay down the basis for something to evolve in the post-independence constitutional structure. The judgment deserves as a landmark in the history of the Indian legal system. However, my own encounter with Justice Mahmood came in 2020, as I was preparing a judgment for Raghunath versus Radha Mohan, 2020 SCC. The case concerned a fairly routine question of determining the commencement of limitation with respect to the exercise of the right of preemption. To trace the contours of the right of preemption, I referred to Govind Dayal Inayatullah, which was one of the earliest cases on the subject. Govind Dayal's case was interesting as it involved the enforcement of the right of preemption between a Muslim vendor and a Hindu vendee. Since the right of preemption traced its origin in Muslim law, the question was whether the right could be exercised against a party that was not Muslim but had merely dealt with the Muslim party. The Allahabad High Court held that it would not be equitable for a non-Muslim merely on the ground of their religion to evade the right of preemption after knowing the condition under which the property was possessed. I remember being deeply struck by Justice Mahmood's opinion for the majority. His opinion was not just a brilliant re-examination of the law of preemption as it stood at that time, it also exhibited a deeply innovative and original approach to what many of us would consider a fairly prosaic matter of contractual and property law. Justice Mahmood observed that the colonial law would require the application of native laws according to the religion of the parties to the suit, was only designed for protection of rights and not for deprivation of the rights of others. Justice Mahmood also noted with disapproval the practice of English judges in substituting their own views under the garb of justice and equity and running roughshod over the established religious practices among Hindus and Muslims in the country. In this regard, I view Justice Mahmood as a paradigm of inherent dynamism that is necessary in judicial work. His work highlights two very important factors. First, the need for a judge to be firmly rooted in their contemporary social realities. And second, the requirement to keep their pulse on the new and upcoming social energies that are likely to disrupt present ways of thought. There is another aspect of this book I deeply resonated with. In his many confrontations with Chief Justice Edge, Justice Mahmood was reprimanded for slackness in his work. Justice Mahmood reportedly considered this as a sign of Justice Edge's belief in his own racial superiority, and countered by preparing a detailed table of the number of hours of work put in by himself. Justice Mahmood cared deeply about the good administration of courts and was known to be very careful with the time he spent towards preparing and delivering his judgments. As a former Chief Justice of two High Courts, I believe that we must constantly be in search of methods that enhance the efficient functioning of our courts. In his time, Justice Mahmood considered that there was still a gap to be bridged between the locals and the relatively recent import of colonial law. He thus sought to make his judgments accessible to common man by giving detailed reasons for his decision. In our time, perhaps, we can work towards bridging access to justice by reducing the pendency of cases in our courts. This can be done through using innovative techniques such as mediation, digitization, courtroom processes, etc. I would like to end with a quote from Cicero, which to me exemplifies the value of Justice Mahmood's powerful and landmark dissent. I quote, "Justice looks for no prize and no price. It is sought for itself and is at once the cause and meaning of all virtues." Thank you once again for granting me the opportunity to address the Abbasi gathering. And congratulations to the authors.
We stand truly honored by this erudite presidential address, and what a wonderful quote to sum it up with. Ladies and gentlemen, nothing remains to be said after the president has delivered his address, but this program that was hosted by the IIC and the Bloomsbury Publishing would like to felicitate our chief guest and our guests of honor for their time, for their gracious presence, and for their erudite addresses. As you can see, this room has a predominance of eminent people from the Aligarh Muslim University, and this book initially was conceived as part of the centenary celebrations of the AMU in 2020, which were very kindly patronized by the AMU Vice Chancellor, Prof. Tariq Mansoor Saab, present amongst here as part of the audience in the first row today. I will request you, sir, to kindly hand over a couple of mementos to our guests. I request AMU Vice Chancellor, Prof. Tariq Mansoor Saab, to please come forward and felicitate Honorable Mr. Justice Sanjay Kishan Kaul Sahab. Would Praveen Tiwari Sahab from Bloomsbury also join? Sir, we would request you to do the honors once more for our guest of honor, Honorable Mr. Justice S. Ravindra Bhat Sahab. Thank you so much, sir, for doing the honors. Drawing once again back to the AMU connection, we have the Lady Vice Chancellor of the Jamia Millia Islamia, today present amongst us, Professor Najma Akhtar, an AMU alumna, again very proudly. May I request you, Madam, to felicitate on our behalf Honorable Mr. Justice Sudhanshu Dhulia Sahab. I will once again request you, Madam, to please felicitate on our behalf Professor Dr. C. Rajkumar, Vice Chancellor, OP Jindal University. I don't see Ms. Usha Muju Munshi. Would you please come forward? Usha, Madam. Dr. Usha Muju Munshi, please. Najma ma'am, once more, please, I will request you to felicitate Dr. Usha Muju Munshi, the Chief Librarian here at the IIC, who has been our very kind hostess, with our deep sense of appreciation for her. Thank you. Thank you so much for doing the honors, Professor Najma Akhtar and Professor Tariq Mansoor Saab. It is my humble duty to deliver the vote of thanks on behalf of the organizers, the hosts, and the authors. We are grateful to honorable judges of the Supreme Court, Mr. Justice Sanjay Kishan Kaul, Mr. Justice Ravindra Bhat, Mr. Justice Sudhanshu Dhulia, and our guest of honor, Dr. C. Kumar. Our effusive thanks to them for gracing the program and making our time worthwhile. Thanks are due to Dr. Usha Muju Munshi, librarian, IIC, and Ms. Kanchan Nagpal, assistant librarian, IIC, and the library staff for painstakingly organizing the event and providing all the logistic supports that we had here. Heartfelt gratitude to the Bloomsbury team, comprising Mr. Praveen Tiwari, Mr. Nitin Valecha, Ms. Minakshi, and Kunal Jalali for their immense support and contribution in nurturing the book and in organizing this program. Best wishes to all present here. Thank you for your time and gracious presence. Once again, congratulations to the authors. And once again, best wishes for many more such publications to come from them and other young budding scholars. Good night and God bless.